Please, just 1 coin. My mom is sick, the little girl begged to polish the single cowboy's boots. The horse stopped because the child would not move. She didn't speak at first, just held up a small tin can, its rim rust-bitten, her hands so thin they trembled. Her face was smudged with soot and windburn, and her coat, if you could call it that, hung from her shoulders like a second skin someone else had outgrown. But her eyes didn't blink. They didn't plead. They just waited. Cashin Reed sat still in the saddle, reins loose in his gloves. The street behind him was silent save for the creak of a shop sign and a crow barking from a hitching post. He'd seen a lot of things in towns like this. A child with a tin can wasn't rare. But a child who didn't flinch? That was different. The girl finally whispered, "Please. Just 1 coin. My mama's sick. I can shine your boots if you want." Cashin looked down at the dust on his boots, then back at her. She couldn't have been older than 4, 5 at most. Her hair was tangled beneath a scrap of scarf, her cheeks wind-cracked. A rag of a brush hung from her waist by a torn ribbon. He dismounted slowly. Not fast enough to startle, not slow enough to ignore her. "I don't want your boots dirty," she said, stepping back, voice wavering. He crouched beside her. "Where's your mama?" She pointed past the mercantile, down a narrow alley that smelled of damp wood, smoke, and something sour. "Back there. She don't talk today. I think she's cold inside." He should have walked away. That was the law of towns like this. If it ain't yours, it ain't your trouble. But Cashin Reed hadn't followed many laws in recent years, at least not the written kind. The townsfolk pretended not to notice as he led his horse through the alley. The storekeep, a grizzled man with breath like old tobacco, muttered behind his barrel, "Ain't his business." Cashin ignored him. The alley narrowed to a lean-to wagon half covered in blankets and tied down rags. Inside, half hidden beneath old quilts, lay a woman. Young, but worn. Her skin was pale with fever, her lips cracked, eyes closed as if she just slipped out of pain and wasn't sure she wanted to come back. "She's burning," the girl whispered behind him. "But she shivers too." Cashin touched the woman's forehead. Heat pulsed beneath his palm. She stirred but didn't wake. He looked at the girl again. "What's your name?" She hesitated. "Letty May." "You got a doctor here?" She shook her head. "Mama said not to go near him again. Said he charges by the breath." Cashin stood, jaw tight. He left without a word. Back on the main street, sunlight filtered through clouds like a secret being whispered across rooftops. He pushed into the mercantile. The bell overhead gave a pitiful clang. "Something you need, Reed?" The storekeep, Gus Langley, grumbled. "Soup mix. Quinine. Blanket, if you got one clean." Gus squinted. "That for you." "No." Gus reached for the soup but hesitated at the medicine. "That girl? The one with the tin?" Cashin didn't answer. "You feed strays, you'll be swarmed with them," Gus muttered, tossing the quinine hard onto the counter. "This town's not for charity." Cashin laid down coins without blinking. Then maybe it's not a town at all. He brought the supplies back to the wagon and set them near the woman's head. He didn't try to feed her. Didn't tuck her in. Just left them there, like a man delivering mail no one would open. Letty watched him the whole time. "Why'd you help?" she asked, clutching her tin. Cashin didn't answer. He mounted up, flicked the reins. His horse turned. Letty's voice followed him. "I'll polish your boots every day, till she's better. Promise." He didn't turn back, but his shoulders tensed like the words had caught somewhere deep. The next morning, the frost on the wood railings melted early. A thin fog clung low over the town, and even the crows stayed quiet. Cashin emerged from the livery after tending to his horse, and there she was. Letty stood barefoot on a crate, brush in one hand, tin in the other, waiting like it was her job and she meant to do it right. "I said I'd polish," she declared. Cashin looked down at his boots, then back at her tiny hands. One of her knuckles was raw. "I didn't ask you to," he said. "But I promised," she replied, Like that settled it. He crouched again. Her eyes were stubborn. Same color as the smoke that rises just before a fire catches. "You cold?" he asked. She nodded. He took his coat off, wrapped it around her shoulders. It swallowed her whole. "I'm not polishing your boots in your own coat," she said fiercely. Cashin didn't smile, but something behind his eyes softened. "Then come eat." He bought bread, dried fruit, and weak coffee from the saloon's back kitchen. The bartender, a kind-eyed woman named Nora, gave him a crooked glance but didn't ask questions. They sat on the steps of the old jailhouse. Cashin didn't say much. Neither did she. But when the bread was gone, Letty leaned against his arm, like someone who hadn't leaned on anyone in a long time. "You always ride alone?" she asked. He nodded. She whispered, "Mama used to sing." "She don't anymore." Cashin stared straight ahead. "Mine used to sing too. Then my sister did. After." Letty looked up. "Did they get better?" Cashin was quiet a long time. "No," he finally said. "But I did." Letty seemed to weigh that like it was a new kind of truth. Across the street, Gus leaned in his doorway, arms crossed, eyes hard. "You lookin' to adopt a beggar, Reed?" he called. "Town don't need more mouths." Cashin stood, lifted Letty gently. "Town don't need more hearts like yours, either." He carried her to the wagon where Mira still lay quiet, though her breathing had evened out. As he turned to go, Letty said, "You forgot your coat." He shook his head. "I didn't." She clutched it closer. That night, wind began to stir the dust again, tugging at shutters and whistling through broken boards. The town lit their lamps early. A storm was coming, not in clouds, but in whispers. Gossip moves quicker than any weather. Cashin sat outside the livery, cleaning his rifle, listening to it all. "They say he's hiding that girl and her mama. He's too soft, just like his father was. I heard the mother's a drunk. Or worse." Cashin said nothing, but his grip on the cloth tightened. The next day, when he passed by the alley, Mira was awake. Her face was pale, her lips cracked, but her eyes were open, and full of something fragile. She didn't speak, just watched him as Letty ran out and said, "Mama saw the sky today. She said it's still blue." Cashin didn't answer. He just nodded once. And then, from inside the alley, Mira rasped something so soft it almost didn't reach him. "You gave her your coat." He turned, slowly. She was looking at him like he was something she'd dreamed once, before sickness, before shame. "And you didn't take your boots back," she added, her voice barely a thread. Cashin met her gaze. Something heavy passed between them. Not promise. Not gratitude. Just recognition. Two people still standing, even if the wind had tried its hardest to knock them down. Then she added, almost too soft to hear, "Don't stay if it's out of pity." He didn't blink. "It's not," he said. Then he walked away, again, but this time, he didn't go far. By morning, the girl was waiting again, this time not with her tin, but with a coat 2 sizes too large and a face that had been scrubbed raw with cold water. Cashin found her at the hitching post outside the livery, perched on a bale of straw, brushing his horse's mane like it was the most important job in the world. Her small fingers worked carefully over each knot. "You're early," he said. She didn't look up. "She didn't cough as much last night." Cashin nodded, tying his bedroll. "That's so." "She asked where you sleep," Letty added. "I said maybe trees." He gave the faintest smile. "Sometimes." She looked up then, serious. "Trees don't got fire." He crouched beside her. "What did your mama say when you told her I left the soup?" "She said not to ask you for more." Her voice softened. "But she ate all of it." Cashin watched her a moment longer, then reached into his saddlebag and handed her a red apple. She gasped like it was gold. "Don't tell the town," he murmured. "They'll raise the price." The wind picked up, not wild but biting, threading through gaps in boards and bones. Winter wasn't ready to come yet, but it was watching. That afternoon, Mira stood for the first time in days. Cashin arrived just in time to see her stumble from the wagon, one hand gripping the frame, the other holding Letty's little coat. She was tall, even hunched with fever, and her hair, uncombed and clinging to her temples, was the color of midnight dust. Her face still bore the deep wear of sickness, but her eyes had cleared, and her spine, though shaking, held a quiet fury. "I didn't ask for saving," she rasped. Cashin stood a few feet off, arms crossed loosely. "Didn't say you did. I don't want her begging." She wasn't begging. She offered work. "She's 4, Mira snapped, too sharp for her own lungs. She coughed and leaned on the wagon again. "She made a promise," Cashin replied. "Didn't break it." Mira glared, then looked down the alley where townsfolk occasionally glanced in, pretending not to notice. "I know what they think," she muttered. Cashin said nothing. "That I'm just some sick stray. Filth and sin in a skirt. Another body that don't matter." He watched her, steady. "That what you think?" She looked up, startled by the question. He stepped closer. "What you think matters more." Mira straightened slowly, hands trembling. "I think I'd rather starve clean than be fed in shame." "You think that's what this is?" he asked gently. She didn't answer. The silence stretched. Then she said, more softly, "I don't want to owe you." "You don't," Cashin said. "Not if you get better." Then he handed her the coat back. "And not if she stops being cold." That night, he left extra firewood beneath the wagon and 2 biscuits wrapped in cloth. He didn't knock. Didn't wait. In the morning, the biscuits were gone. The town began to mutter louder. At the saloon, one of the ranch hands said, "I saw Reed talking to the fever woman again. Maybe he's touched in the head." Another laughed. "You know what they say. Some men get thirsty enough to drink ditch water." At the post office, a woman in a velvet hat whispered, "The little girl sleeps in that cart like an animal." In the store, Gus Langley started offering Cashin receipts for everything, loudly, so others could hear. "That quinine for your friend?" Cashin didn't answer. But one day, when Letty stood beside him with a scarf over her mouth, Gus leaned forward and said, "You feed fleas, don't be shocked when they stay." Cashin looked up, quiet and slow, and said, "You were a child once too, Gus." Gus blinked. Didn't answer. That afternoon, Cashin took Letty riding just past the edge of town. She clung to the saddle horn and laughed for the first time he'd heard. The sound was wild and too brief, like it surprised her. "Your horse got a name?" she asked. He nodded. "Oren." "Why?" He thought for a moment. "Was the name of a man who taught me how to sharpen knives. Said a dull blade makes cowards." "Are you a coward?" she asked, almost kindly. "Was once." She leaned into him as the wind cut over the hills. "Not anymore." Mira had started to walk short distances. She never asked for help, never thanked him aloud, but he found a tin cup washed clean and set carefully on his saddle horn one morning. The cup had belonged to his sister once. He'd left it at the wagon weeks ago. Later, he saw Mira sewing on the wagon step. The fabric was threadbare, but her hands were skilled. Every stitch was precise. She worked until her knuckles cramped. "She's making me a dress," Letty said, skipping beside him. "Outa curtain cloth." That night, Cashin watched from a distance as Mira bent over the fabric, coughing softly into her sleeve. He didn't speak. But before he left, he set a spool of blue thread beside her. The first real cold came early. One morning, Cashin arrived to find Letty wearing shoes, scuffed, but tied. Mira stood beside her with a splintered comb in her hand, hair brushed neat for once. "I don't want you to think we're trash," she said without preamble. "I never did," he replied. They stood in silence. Then Mira added, "But the town thinks it for you." "I don't give a damn what the town thinks," Cashin said. But she stepped forward, voice low. "You should. You live here. You need their respect." He met her eyes. "I need my own more." She looked down, jaw tight. "You're going to ruin yourself." "I've done worse." That afternoon, Nora from the saloon gave Letty a jar of sugar candy, whispering, "Don't tell Gus." Letty ran to Mira with it, grinning. Mira opened the jar carefully. Her hands were shaking again. "She never had candy before," she murmured. "Not like this." "She'll have more," Cashin said from behind her. "You keep saying that." "Because I mean it." Then, for the first time, Myra's voice cracked. "Don't make promises you'll leave behind." Cashin looked at her, really looked. "I don't break promises I don't make." Mira covered her mouth, as if the tenderness had hit too hard. She didn't speak again until he turned to leave. "Cashin." He paused. "I don't hate you for helping." His shoulders rose and fell once. Then he walked away. The next morning, Gus tacked a sign to his store window. "No charity. No sick. No beggars." Cashin read it without comment. Later, Letty asked, "Are we beggars?" He lifted her onto the horse and said, "No. You're a promise." That evening, Mira set out a wooden bowl filled with cooked beans, left covered on his saddle. A gesture. Not payment. Not apology. Just pride, wrapped in rags and offered gently. He didn't eat it in front of her. But when he returned the bowl, he'd scrubbed it clean. One night, as the wind howled down the main street at last, carrying the smell of pine smoke and frost, Cashin sat outside the livery cleaning his rifle. A boy passed by and spat near his boots. "My pa says you're dirty now." Cashin didn't flinch. "Your pa should wash his mouth out." A few folks laughed. But it was quiet laughter. Careful. He returned to the alley and stood at the edge of the wagon, where Mira sat wrapped in a wool blanket, cradling Letty on her lap. The three of them said nothing. But for the first time, none of them looked away. As he turned to leave, Mira whispered something to herself, soft enough she thought he couldn't hear. "He doesn't want to save us. He wants to remember how." Cashin paused, but didn't turn around. He reached into his pocket and left something on the step before he vanished into the dark. It was a coin, the same one Letty had asked for on the first day, and it gleamed brighter than silver in the moonlight. The firewood cracked in half before it caught, and Mira flinched at the sound. She sat wrapped in the wool blanket Cashin had left behind days ago, her knees drawn to her chest, fingers pale from the cold. Letty slept beside her on the wagon bench, breath puffing softly from her nose, one hand still wrapped around the edge of her mama's coat. Dawn was near, but the world outside still held its breath. Everything wore a skin of frost, roof slats, saddle leather, even the brush handle Letty had left leaning against the wagon's wheel. A half-eaten biscuit lay in the dirt. Mira stared at the flame as it rose slowly. Her own breath came ragged, uneven. She hadn't spoken aloud in a day and a half, not since the chill settled in her chest again. It was quieter than fever, but deeper. When she did speak, it was only to the fire. "I used to be good," she said. The flame didn't answer, but her voice trembled just enough to betray how long she'd held it in. "Used to sew for the preacher's wife in Nebraska. Read psalms to the blind man on Sundays. People used to smile when I walked in a room." The logs shifted. Sparks leapt. A tiny ember burned her finger. She didn't move. Now the fire only took and didn't give. Kindness felt like a thing Cashin kept setting down for her, and she kept trying to return it unopened. By mid-morning, she tried standing. Her legs wobbled under her, but she made it as far as the alley mouth, just beyond the shadows. Sunlight hit her skin and she squinted, like a ghost learning the world again. Across the street, two shopwives went silent. One whispered, "There she is." The other replied, "He's still feeding her?" Mira turned away before their eyes could finish judging. Her body folded into itself like it remembered shame better than posture. Behind her, Cashin's boots sounded soft against the dirt. "You don't have to come out," he said. She didn't answer. He held a wrapped parcel, some bread, dried meat, a boiled potato. He set it gently on the edge of the wagon, careful not to look like he was offering. "Letty said you used to sing," he murmured. I used to do a lot of things, she said, her voice hoarse. Still can. She gave a quiet laugh that didn't touch her eyes. Singing's for people who believe someone wants to listen. Cashin didn't respond. He just looked at her, then the sky, then back again. My sister used to sing when she was sick. I didn't understand it then. And now I wish I had listened harder. Mira swallowed, jaw tight. Your sister gone? He nodded. What happened? He looked at her like the question had surprised him. Not the asking, but the softness behind it. Winter. No doctor. I was out trying to trade for food. Came back and... He paused. She'd folded the blankets neat, set my old coat on the stool, and wrote me a note I never could read. She didn't know her letters, but she still tried. Mira turned toward him. That's why you helped us. No, he said quietly. I helped you because you asked me not to. She blinked. He added, most folks either beg or run. You did neither. She looked down, ashamed. I told Letty not to shine boots anymore. I know. She's too small to serve people. She wasn't serving. She was trying to matter. The words hit something she hadn't armored. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Then she whispered, how do you forgive yourself for what you couldn't stop? Cashin didn't move. You don't. You just keep showing up. A bird sang from somewhere above them, thin and alone. That night, Letty showed up at the livery again. She wore the curtain dress Mira had been stitching for days. It was uneven at the hem but clean and carefully patched, with 2 tiny blue buttons down the front. She twirled once for Cashin, shy but proud. Mama said I could wear it just once. He crouched down. She did a fine job. I told her it makes me look less cold. He nodded. It does. She handed him a small tin, the same one she'd first held up weeks ago. There's nothing in it, she said. But Mama said I should give it back. Cashin took it, thumb brushing the rim. It belongs to you. Not anymore. He watched her run back across the street, arms out like wings, the hem of the dress catching in the wind. Her laughter rang out, brief and bright, and made heads turn. From a storefront, Gus muttered, she'll learn not to smile in a town like this. Cashin walked past him without a word, but his jaw was set hard. 2 days later, the wind returned with teeth. Cashin arrived at the wagon just as Mira collapsed behind the saloon. He dropped the sack he'd been carrying and caught her before her head struck the stone. Her body was ice, limp, breath shallow. She was just fetching water. Letty cried, clutching her brush. Cashin wrapped Mira in his coat and carried her down the street, boots echoing against the wood plank walks. Doors closed. Curtains shifted. Not one person stepped out. At the edge of town stood the old clinic. Most folks said the doctor had gone west. Cashin knew better. He kicked the door in. Inside, among dust and jars of forgotten remedies, Dr. Calder-Wynne blinked up from his desk. He hadn't aged much, but his eyes carried years. You owe her nothing, Cashin growled, laying Mira on the cot. I know, the doctor said, already reaching for his satchel. You treat her like you would your own. I will. I'm not asking. I said I will. Wynn's voice shook with something other than fear. Guilt, maybe. Memory. Cashin sat back as the doctor worked, cleaning Myra's lungs, wrapping her tightly, applying heat to her feet, murmuring under breath. Letty stood nearby, both fists clenched. Mama's gonna be mad, she said. She hates being carried. Cashin didn't smile. She'll forgive me. She only forgives people once. Then I'll make it count. Wynne looked up. She'll live. But she needs rest. Real rest. Not alley shadows and borrowed coats. Cashin nodded. When Mira woke, she found herself beneath clean sheets. The window was cracked open. A breeze carried the smell of rain and pine sap. She reached for her chest and felt the tight wrap of gauze. Her hand shook. Cashin sat in the chair beside her, boots crossed at the ankle. "You carried me," she rasped. "You were heavy," he said. She tried to glare, but her eyes filled. "You shouldn't have. I wanted to. You're not my husband. No. Not my kin. No." "Then why?" He didn't answer. He just reached into his coat and handed her something small. It was the tin. Cleaned. Polished. A small daisy placed inside. "I'm not here to fix what broke you," he said. "Just to be what didn't leave." She held the tin in her lap, staring at the daisy. "My husband died in a mining collapse," she whispered. "They said I could sue, but I didn't have the right papers." Cashin didn't interrupt. "I tried to work. Clean. Then got sick. Then got called names. Then stopped singing." Her voice cracked. "Now I don't know who I am except Letty's mama and a woman who owes too many people too much." Cashin leaned forward. "Letty says you still hum at night." She blinked. She said it's soft, like ash before it turns back into flame. Mira looked at him then, truly looked, and something in her eyes, dark and glassy, changed. She whispered, "That coat still smells like you." "I haven't worn it since," he said. Their eyes didn't part for a long time. In the next room, Letty's voice rang out, "Mama, can I draw a picture of Mr. Cashin holding the sky?" Cashin glanced at the door. Mira whispered, "You should let her." He turned back. "I already have." The sky split just before noon. It wasn't thunder or storm that broke it, just the sharp, dry sound of a hammer driving a nail through wood. Gus Langley stood on a crate outside his store, tacking a new sign to the frame with hard, deliberate blows. "No strays. No charity. No filth." Below it, in crooked red ink, someone had scrawled especially not beggar girls and their sick mamas. Cashin watched from across the street, arms folded over his chest, jaw clenched tight. The hammer hit again. And again. It didn't echo, it throbbed, like a warning bell without mercy. Beside him, Mira stood pale but steady, her hands wrapped in the ends of a shawl Letty had chosen that morning. The fever hadn't returned, but weakness clung to her limbs like second skin. She didn't speak. She didn't look away, either. Letty stood between them, one hand gripping Cashin's sleeve, the other holding her little tin. Empty again. The town had stopped pretending. Doors stayed closed. Steps crossed to the other side of the street. Children weren't allowed to look too long. And still the three of them stood there, facing it all, like a family no one gave permission to be. "Why today?" Mira asked quietly. Cashin didn't answer. But truth was, he knew. Last night, a boy had seen them outside the clinic. Had seen Letty sleeping on Myra's lap, and Cashin sitting nearby, carving a wooden horse for her from a scrap of pine. A child smiling like she belonged. A man not related by blood acting like he cared. That image had burned someone's comfort down. "They'll try to push us out," Mira said. "They'll try," he replied. She looked up. "And if I go, you'll be left with the whispers. I've survived worse than whispers. You shouldn't have to." Cashin turned to her. "Neither should you." She opened her mouth, then closed it again. The shawl slipped slightly off her shoulder. He reached out and fixed it, his fingers brushing the hollow of her collarbone. The moment held, quiet as snow, before the stillness cracked. A rock hit the wagon. Then another. Then the voice, "Get your rats outta here." Letty flinched. Mira froze. Cashin didn't. He stepped forward, eyes cutting toward the general store. Gus stood there, no longer hiding behind signs. Just watching. Behind him, two younger men, ranch hands, maybe, hovered with the look of boys told they'd earned the right to harm someone. "You throw another," Cashin said, voice low, "and I swear I'll bury it in your floorboards." One of the men snorted. "You think she's worth that kind of fight?" Cashin didn't move. "I don't fight for worth. I fight when I see cowards." The man reached for his belt. So did Cashin. It stopped there. A moment stretched tight enough to snap bone. Then Dr. Calder Wynne stepped out from the clinic, coat on, bag in hand. He crossed the dirt and stood beside Cashin. "If you're chasing people out of town," Wynne said, "you'd best start with me." The younger men exchanged looks. Gus didn't blink. Wynne added, "I saw what the girl's been through. I saw what her mama survived. And if anyone's going to run them off, they'll do it over my body." Cashin tilted his head. "You sure about that?" Wynne looked at Mira. "Yes." Mira exhaled. Not relief. Something older. Recognition. The man with the belt spat. "You're all sick." "Maybe," Cashin said. "But we're not small." He turned to Mira. "You got a choice." She looked at him, hollow and whole at once. "What choice? To let this town keep you quiet, or to let me drive you out with dignity?" She stared at the wagon, at the cracked wheel, the patchwork quilt, the bent lantern that barely held a flame. Then she looked at Letty, clutching that tin like it still meant something. "I won't run," she whispered. "Not again." Cashin met her eyes. "Then we walk out. Not as strays. As people." "I don't have anything," she said. "You have me," he answered. "And what if that's not enough?" He smiled then. Small. Steady. "Then I'll carry the rest." Behind them, a hush fell over the town. Mira reached down, lifted Letty, and stepped into the wagon. Cashin walked to the livery and brought out a second cart, one he'd bought quietly 3 days earlier. Reinforced. Canvas covered. Food in the back. Tools beneath the seat. He hitched Oren. Tightened the harness. When Mira emerged with Letty bundled close, he offered no speech, no grand declaration, just held out a hand to help her up. She took it. Wynne climbed onto his porch, arms crossed, silent approval in his posture. The townsfolk gathered now, half out of spite, half out of curiosity. Cashin climbed into the front seat and held the reins. Gus called out, "You ride with beggars, Reed. You'll die poor." Cashin didn't look back. "Then I'll die loved." The wagon rolled forward. Someone threw another rock. It missed. Someone spit. It landed on dust. But no one stopped them. No one dared. They passed the general store. Past the well. Past the old blacksmith's yard where the iron bell still hung. And as they neared the end of the road, Letty reached into her pocket and pulled out a single coin. The same coin. She dropped it into her tin, closed the lid, and whispered, "It's full now." Mira turned, touched her daughter's cheek, and whispered back, "So are we." The wagon vanished down the trail, dust rising behind it like smoke off a dying fire. They camped by the creek that night. No roofs, no church bells. Just stars sharp enough to pierce skin and a wind that finally smelled like something new. Cashin built a fire. Mira boiled water. Letty drew in the dirt with a stick, sketching the wagon with crooked wheels and a figure she labeled Mr. Cashin with a sword. Mira sat beside him after Letty fell asleep. "She's never called someone Mr. with that much hope before," she said. "She ever had someone worth calling it?" She shook her head. He handed her the tin. "You don't owe me anything." "I know. But I'd stay," he added. Mira looked at him. Really looked. "Why?" "Because when you speak, it's like the ashes know how to breathe again." She covered her mouth, laughing once, half joy, half ache. "You gonna kiss me now?" she asked, voice small. He didn't answer with words, just leaned forward, gentle as the wind, and touched his forehead to hers. A week later, another sign was nailed to the general store in town. In different handwriting. In charcoal. "They left whole. You stayed small." Which city are you watching our video from? Please leave a comment. Please subscribe to the channel as well. Thank you.